Afriforesight forecasts African cobalt and copper production to increase over 2024 and 2025. This as new production and expansions come online. With major copper supply regions facing constraints, there may be opportunities for African nations to get a piece of the market share. Chief Sustainability Engineer for Afriforesight, Kirthi Ramdhanee, joins us now to unpack these opportunities for not just African nations, but for investors and equipment suppliers. Kirthi, thank you so much for your time. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for being with us, Kirthi. Of course, I'm keen to maybe to start off by understanding the use cases for both copper and cobalt and why we are anticipating a boom over the next few years.
Okay, so starting off with copper, copper demand is mainly from electrification. So we see this as developing economies require greater electricity access. We also see it in developed economies as technology improves and we see a growing need for larger data centers and more technologies comes online, such as AI. We should expect more copper use for wiring and cabling purposes. We also see cobalt demand increasing, and this is mainly from the battery sector, from portable electronics such as your laptops and cell phones, as well as from electric vehicles. As we know, there's many countries and regions across the world like the USA, Europe, China, which is pushing for lower carbon emissions. We see that a higher adoption of electric vehicles is occurring, and we should see cobalt demand as well as copper demand increasing from the increasing need for EVs.
With that said, let's talk about hotspots on the African continent. Where can we expect, or where do we know that there are large deposits of both cobalt and copper?
Yes, so copper and cobalt are mined together generally, and we see a large amount of copper mining occurring in the DRC as well as Zambia, as well as increasing mines in both of these countries. Smaller supply regions in Africa include South Africa, with some exploration projects occurring in Botswana and Namibia as well.
One of the issues that actually has arisen here, and I think being largely investigated around the world, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on it, is the issues around cobalt mining in the DRC and the conflicts we're seeing around it, and whether that is a threat to even the forecasting and the production numbers that we're thinking about in the future. With all of that, instability and all of those lives being lost, can we realistically see a thriving cobalt mining sector in the DRC?
Yes. So to start off with production, we are seeing production rising, and that's incentivized by the growing demand and the rising prices. But we also are seeing companies as well as automakers invest in safer mining practices and improving ethical mining practices as well. Like we have the Cobalt Alliance, which has mining companies like Glencore, as well as automotive companies like Tesla, which joined. And that organization is one of the few that are striving towards more ethical mining practices in the DRC, as well as other cobalt producing regions.
Also, let's talk about the issue of the commodity cycle. We know that that's a rather volatile market. It has, of course, its peaks and troughs there. When we think of copper and cobalt, how do they play into that cycle? And is that also all, maybe factored in when we speak about the investment case and the opportunities that lie ahead for these two metals?
Yes, so we are seeing growing investment into copper and cobalt, mainly because of the growing demand for it. We're also seeing that at the moment, those elevated interest rates have put some downwards pressure on investment initially. However, in many regions, as we expect these elevated interest rates to start declining, possibly towards the end of this year, early next year, we should see some companies and some miners be incentivized to invest more into mining these commodities.
Let's talk also then about some of the opportunities for investors that lie ahead here, and even for equipment manufacturers. I think this is important part of how we think of the investments here. That is not only for the miners, but also for other players along the value chain.
Yes, so we are seeing other players come in, and they invest in copper and cobalt, and especially like when companies that require copper and cobalt, they set up supply agreements directly with these miners, and we are seeing an increasing trend of that happening. So the miners are getting investment from downstream companies such as the automakers and electrification companies as well.
I want to speak about, what then we're seeing and what we're hoping to also see in terms of local economic development here. What we've actually found is with many deposits of very important metals, minerals, and the likes on the African continent, Kirthi, lots of African communities have remained poor, African countries have remained poor. Is there a conversation around copper and cobalt to make sure that there's more sustainable growth, more local development for countries like the DRC and Zambia?
Yeah, so actually, we've seen in the DRC, the government has been negotiating with some of their mining companies, especially their Chinese mining companies, and they've been renegotiating their contracts and looking to getting more revenue into the country, as well as improving contract transparency and improving their ethical mining practices, as well as making their mines more sustainable. We've also seen some regulatory improvements in Zambia as well, just to increase the sustainability of their mining and to renegotiate their tax regime and increase their profitability from their mines.
Well, we'd like to thank you for your insights today, Kirthi. Very interesting, and we hope that this is a great mining boom for the continent. That was Kirthi Ramdhanee, Chief Sustainable Engineer for Afriforesight.